Okay, talking about upper back muscles, we kind of need to know that there's like maybe two groups that we can think about. Muscles that move the shoulder blades and muscles that move the ribs. The muscles that move the ribs are pretty deep in here. They're underneath. So these are all the superficial muscles. These are the deep muscles. So these are underneath all those superficial muscles, and they control what the ribs do. Because the shoulder blade sits on basically the corner of the rib cage here, what the ribs do influences what the shoulder blade does. So, we're talking about upper back muscles, traps, rhomboids, rotator cuff, maybe even lats. But it's important to think about what our ribs are doing, as that's what's going to influence what these other muscles can do. And also knowing that muscles do multiple things. So this is all the trap muscle here, but it pulls in lots of different directions. It has some fibers that run up the neck, some fibers that run down, middle of the back, some right toward sort of that hump in your back there. So position of the spine and ribs is going to influence what these other muscles can do. Okay, when we talk about upper back training, kind of like when I just showed those deep muscles in that previous clip, I'm always thinking about where are my ribs to be able to get the most out of my back muscles. So this is a good warm-up exercise I'm about to show. I just call it a W raise, and I do it on a bench. That's pretty easy. I'm going to set up, and I don't want to have my ribs too far down because that's going to limit what I can do with some of my back. And I don't want to have my ribs too far up because, that'll be focusing too much on the extension and not so much our traps and our rhomboids and those other muscles that we want to hit with this exercise. This is a good exercise warm up because it does also like really contract your rotator cuff muscles. And, you can really just tightly squeeze at the top there. To set up here, I'm going to go face down on this bench, and it's helpful to have your feet against the wall and also not overarch your back when you get in position. So when I get here, I want to make sure that I'm not overarching my low back and almost lifting my hips or tilting my hips that way. It's helpful to sort of tuck your tailbone, squeeze your glutes, push those feet into the wall, and then your base is really secure. Initially, for the W raise, I want my sort of shoulders rounded so that I can practice a little bit of sort of spinal extension. And then on top of that, I can layer because I want my spine to move first, then the shoulder blades, and then the arms. And that's kind of a good way to practice any bit of back exercise. So spine first, shoulder blades, arms. That makes a nice W. I'm really trying to push my thumbs up into the air. I don't want to see too much elbow fault. Okay, really thinking thumbs up, arms in line with my body, squeezing my back muscles together as tight as I can, and unshrugging. We might find that we immediately come into this more of a shrugged position, and that's a lot of upper traps, and that is upper back, but it's not necessarily maybe what our goal is. Middle traps, lower traps that don't get used that often. So I like to do a rep with a hold here. So we'll do something like 4 reps with a 5-second hold. And during that 5 seconds, I'm thinking, what am I doing with my back muscles? What am I doing? Like, what can I feel as I'm doing this? Okay, so hold me to it. Count 5 seconds here. 4 reps. 20 seconds total, right? Resetting, really getting round, letting my spine extend or letting my spine flex, extend the spine, shoulder blades together, arms up, staying flat, unshrugging. 3, 4, 5. Touch my elbows together. That's helpful to getting that big rounding motion. The thumbs up, poke the sky. 3, 4, 5. Right, and really, if I can feel now the squeeze in the middle of my back, I'm going to try to exaggerate it. This is like my last one. So how tight can I squeeze those upper back muscles? All right, so that'd be one set of 4 reps holding for 5 seconds. And already I can feel like rotator cuff. I can feel lots of warmth here in my shoulders, and it's not very challenging for the muscles. It's kind of easy to do. It's hard to really contract that hard, but it's not going to fatigue you a whole lot. And so it's a good thing to do. That will prime your upper back and get your sensory, like the sensation there, on point so that when you go into doing something, a cable row, a single arm row, whatever, you're going to be capable of like really pulling with the muscles that we want. All right, for a rear delt exercise, I like using a bench set up like this because I feel like if we don't have to think about what our spine and everything are doing, we can really focus on rear delt. Okay, so rear delt is just that muscle that's on the back of our shoulder. So I wouldn't necessarily classify this as an upper back exercise, although the upper back muscles do have to do a lot to hit your rear delt. I usually don't start people with weight, or if anything, it's a 2-pound weight. 2 pounds, 1 pound, it doesn't matter, right? Because it's more the specificity of being able to hit that muscle. So what the rear delt muscle does is horizontal abduction, so moving the arm away from the midline. Okay, now rear delt goes just from the humerus to the scapula. So we don't need our scapula move a whole lot to be able to really, if we're trying to isolate rear delt, we want to just sit that shoulder blade down, pull that arm back and out. Doing it on incline bench is a great way to do this. And I also like to think about keeping my arms up toward my ears. That also tends to hit that muscle just a little bit more. So here's my rear delt. Again, don't overarch the low back, right? Tailbone tucked. I'm actually going to sort of lift my shoulder blades back and down and together. And then can I focus on just lifting that arm up to the side. So my usual progression, these are 2-pound weights, is to start. How many very strict ones can I do? Keeping my shoulder blades together and moving my arms. And then once my shoulder blades kind of start getting out of it, then it's okay, but we still have to follow a good order of operations. Shoulder blades first and then rear delts. And I'm lifting up quite high toward my ears. And that's where I'm able to just really feel the back of my shoulder here. Okay, single arm dumbbell row is next. And this one can be kind of tricky because there's a lot of moving parts. I don't just want to think about moving the working side arm. Again, let's start kind of toward the center. What are our ribs going to do first? And that's going to influence what our shoulder blade and then the arm will do. So working from like center out there. So let's start even with position. I like to keep my stance sort of very, very, very square with a hand on the bench, whatever you have here, so that my hips are square here and I can sort of work toward a center position here. So some of the essence of this is rotation, of being able to push with this arm and rotate my ribs around. So as these ribs rotate, already, these right side back muscles have to contract to keep everything coming, up to this side with it. So that's going to mean you're going to develop sort of like serratus anterior, some of these muscles that are going to help you push this arm around is going to rotate those ribs. So rotation is very important here. And then the path of the dumbbell, because we're rotating first and then moving our arm and dumbbell sort of last. I want that to be sort of toward your hip. I think of, put a gun in a holster right here. So rotating first with my dumbbell and then putting the dumbbell on my hip. Push with my arm, rotate. course, that's a little slow, but... And I definitely want to unshrug here as well. Okay, we typically get plenty of traps. I don't want this to end up being too trap-like here, shrugging up. That's upper trap. I want more mid and lower trap. Lifting my chest, right? Trying to put that dumbbell low on my hip. Even just pausing here if you can. You can really feel those muscles firing. Shoulders down. Chest up. Push that arm through. So I was really saying push with this arm through. I even feel that if I rotate my elbow pit forward as I'm hitting this really peak, I'm creating a tight shoulder joint there, able to flex this back really hard. Okay, the other side. Big chest. Shoulder down. All right, we got seated rows next. They're pretty good for hitting your back kind of all across. The main thing we want to think about, especially if we don't have a chest support, if we're using a cable instead, I kind of like using a cable. It's sort of my preference for giving me the ability to kind of move my spine quite a bit. We get to think about our order of operations here and kind of working from that center out idea of moving spine first, then the shoulder blades, and then the arms. And then anytime I'm letting that exercise back out, it's going to be the same thing. Arms out first, then shoulder blades, then rounding the spine. And so the seated row is really where we get to kind of like practice that order of operations idea. That being said, when we're setting up here, I don't want this to be a lower back rounding forward and back. This needs to be an upper back rounding and flexing. Meaning, if we've ever reached over a fence before, that's what I want to think about. My abs and everything stay back, my low back stays flat and secure, and I'm able to move my ribs independently of my lower body. Another good tip for your upper back exercises is to use a wider grip. It doesn't have to be, I'm not going really wide on rows. I just want something so that my arms can easily pass around my body here instead of feeling maybe cramped and squeezed in here like we normally would on a cable row where people think that you have to use this sort of narrow grip handle. Let's use a wider grip and get a much better central back connection where I'm trying to squeeze my shoulder blades together hard. So especially if you've got 4 sets in your workout now, you can do one, which is you might call a feeler set, which is less weight, higher reps, and squeezing at the top on each one so that you can really hone in and figure out what muscles am I trying to hit with this exercise. And this is a sensory thing. It's not, you can't see it, you have to feel it. So really kind of letting my upper back round, just checking my posture in the mirror, low back staying flat, upper back rounds, ribs lift, shoulders come down, elbows back. And it's everything in reverse. So again, especially if we can, hold and squeeze. And I try to let my lower arm relax. The direction we pull can have some influence. So usually I try to aim belly button, definitely below ribs, so that this elbow joint is open. If it's an angled elbow joint, we're going to be using a lot of bicep, recruiting a lot of these shoulder muscles. If I can keep that arm almost down, limp from here, just little claw hands, then I know I'm just acting on my humerus with my back muscles here. So make sure we're keeping that bar down. Don't get caught up in pulling the bar towards you, because then that typically leads to a shrug or getting over the bar. If I only think, get the bar close to me, right, we could do shrugs, we could do rows like that. Or if I'm thinking, what are my back muscles doing? That creates a different picture altogether. And the row is the first one where I feel like it's a good analogous muscle to train because of the carryover to the bench. So if we're doing bench press and we want a tight upper back, think, what is my bench press position in which I need a tight upper back? That would be when the bar is here and I'm squeezing tight and I need to brace myself to press as hard as I can. So our row is an analogous exercise for that. As I pull here, this is the shape that we want to be training for a good bench press. So my good row shape should mirror my good bench press shape in that way. I'm trying to inhale here, exhale hard. Unshrug. Okay, next exercise is lat pull down. Very similar to a row, just a vertical row. I want the same center out idea of ribs first, then shoulder blades, then arms, and then arms, shoulder blades, ribs to finish the exercise. I'm also thinking about what my back is doing, not about getting the bar close to me, so that we can focus on maybe pointing elbows at our hips, keeping those hands sort of close to us here and pulling down hard. I don't want to end up being too far over, pulled over here, again, because that upper back's now kind of open instead of being closed and tight and getting a lot of good sensation of shoulder blades being pulled down and together by those different muscle fibers that we want. So not too wide of a grip. I'm still taking just outside my shoulder width. This might be a little wider than my row grip, but definitely not a full wide lat pull down that you might see grip, just because I feel like more of a neutral helps build this position better, and then you can branch off of it from there. Okay, so some center out. Ribs are down here actually, because that's a full lengthened position. So ribs lifting already sort of activates my shoulder blades. So this is a pretty good thing to practice if you're not very good at it, is being able to lift your ribs and depress those shoulder blades and hold that position there. That gets some muscles in the shoulder girdle active. Your spine is working. Low traps, rhomboids are working. Okay, and so that's that initial movement of a lat pull down, and then it's arms. So that's ribs and shoulders there, and then we follow with arms. Ribs, shoulders, arms, elbows toward hips. Let the arms out first. Let the shoulders out. I could use just a little wider. And that's based on just the feeling that I get. And again, I'm pretty flexible, so I can get that bar to my chest. But if you can't get that bar to your chest, it doesn't matter. We're not trying to get the bar to our chest. We're trying to flex our back muscles as hard as we can. So even if I have good technique, but that bar stops right about my chin, that's okay, right? As you keep practicing, as you keep getting more limber, if you're stretching, right, you can be able to sink and squeeze those last little bits there. But bar getting to the chest doesn't so much matter. but bar placement does. Always aiming to keep the bar close to you. Helps with the hands back, elbows toward hips, big chest, because that's where I feel the most of my back muscles squeezing. And again, that's how I'm going to set up for a good bench press. Okay, laterals are next. And with those, if we're thinking about upper back position, it's all about starting position, especially if we're doing these standing. If I'm doing any sort of standing exercise, I need to make sure everything down low is going to be tight, right? So I'm always starting everybody out with some basic cues, right? Strong feet, wiggle your toes, make strong feet, grip the ground, squeeze your glutes. Next, right? Tighten up the hips. From there, okay, so that's sort of just our basic starting point, right? Hips, especially hips tight. And then shoulder blades back if we're doing lateral raises, because we want to engage those upper back muscles we've been using, rows, lat pull downs, whatever. Let's use those same muscles here, those deep muscles that pull the ribs up. Use those here because it works on your posture. It's also going to make this dumbbell lateral raise much harder. I've got 5s here. If you're really doing some strict ones, you don't need to do too heavy a weight, especially if we're keeping our arms long. If you've got anything close to a 6-foot wingspan, that's killer when you're lifting 5 pounds out on 3-foot arms, Okay, so strict technique in mind, ribs up, shoulders back. Kind of lift this arm up dead to the side. Okay, a little bit in front if your shoulders are bugging you, but if you can, maybe even grabbing the lighter weights, can you lift those arms up behind you? Right, and that's where I can try to keep my shoulders in control, keep my ribs up. And this one's different. I'm going to actually inhale as I raise my arms, exhale as I come down. Although we are trying to keep these upper back muscles squeezing real tight together, this does become like a lifting exercise, and I do end up using upper trap muscles here, and that's okay. Especially if in the bottom position, we're letting them relax and lengthen, and we're lifting our ribs up as well. Okay, so the breathing like this is going to use those muscles here and lift your ribs, and because that's what we need to do to create a stable place for all these muscles to fire. For the side delts, the stability needs to be here, and so activating all these respiratory muscles that lift up and contract in our ribs here to allow us to brace and lift that arm up is a good strategy. So I'm inhaling as I lift. Trying to keep my chest up. Okay, seated overhead press. Oh, and one thing about those lateral raises before we go on. Lateral raises are hard to progress in general, so if you're only seeing small increments in those lateral raises, that's still a good thing. Especially if your gym has maybe like 2.5 pound increments up to 20 or something like that, so 17.5, 12.5, those are really good weights to use. If you're really not seeing progress in those, it is okay to grab the next heavier weight. So if you're working with the 10s and you have some 12s available and you're like, I can't do a full set of 8 or 6 with the 15s. For that first set after you feel warm, do a solid set of 3 or 4 reps with the 15s and then go about your regular workout, because slowly sort of getting some exposure to that weight will help you progress in those dumbbell lateral raises, but that is very slow. Now for these overhead presses, I'm not sure exactly without looking at you why you might not be able to progress, but I'll still cover some basics with you. And think about some positions here. So if we're doing an overhead press, I want to see like a good stacked position. So if I am holding this arm overhead or this arm overhead, is that arm and everything in line with my body here maybe not, if maybe it's a little bit back, whenever I line that weight up there, it really sort of loads down correctly. I feel like I call it a bone column, right? Where instead of being supported on muscles and ligaments and stuff, you're kind of loading more of a column of bones to support the weight, and only needing to lock out instead of needing to fight at an in-range position. So if you have trouble getting both arms totally back behind your head, it may be worthwhile to doing a variation there. Like, we got to be hanging every day, of course, stretching those arms out. So if we have trouble getting those arms fully back overhead presses may pose a problem. So if we're pressing and that arm can only end up here and not there, okay, there, that's not quite our full range as opposed to there. All right, so if we can do a full press, what I want it to look like is starting with shoulder blades back and tight, again squeezing in that upper back before I even press, because I want to create a solid rack for these muscles with my ribs lifted here. And then I'll press up and try to get that weight back so I can lock my triceps, and again flexing my upper back here, pushing my head forward so that I can hold that weight and focus on my lockout. As I'm coming down, I'm almost trying to pull the weight down and squeeze my upper back muscles. One thing I've had a client do that he actually found some success with it is what I call the fake press, where you just act like you have 50-pound weights in your hand. By creating so much contrasting contraction in your body, what sort of muscles sensation can you elicit? So squeezing my back together and tight, can I act like I'm pressing this as hard as I can while keeping my shoulders down? Lock that thing out, pull down, upper back tight. Oh God, it's so heavy. So practicing being able to contract in those positions will lend itself to sort of feeling more stable in this press, and then ultimately opening up more for you as far as increasing your weight. If you're like, okay, I can get my arm back behind my head, that feels fine, and I feel like I can contract my back muscles, great. You checking both of your technique boxes, then don't be afraid to challenge that and go ahead and grab that next set of dumbbells. Again, even if you can only do 3 or 4 reps, so that you can again expose yourself to that weight, right? So we're going to take, our next weight up, even if it feels like hell to get it up here. Can I squeeze? Can I knock out 1 iffy rep, 2 iffy reps, and then go back down and grab your regular working weight and carry on? Okay, so that's our first thing. If you're finding like, hey, I don't know if I can get my arm back in that position, I just feel too tight through my arms, that's not a big deal. We can still get a good overhead press just by using the incline bench, but having it be a near vertical. So in this position, to get more of a bone column setup, I don't need to have an extreme range of motion in my shoulder to be able to get there. So we can still do a very solid overhead press using a lot of upper back contraction, but in a range that might feel better and that you're better able to progress due to your range of motion. So I'm still keeping my upper back tight, and I just don't need to get that arm behind my ear to finish the press. And again, our main mover is still, the front of the shoulder there. So there's a couple of options and a couple of ideas about how to keep your overhead press increasing.